Section 2, The Call to Courage. In the earliest days of building our company, I found myself sitting at a table with my team after they asked if we could meet for an hour. When I realized there was no agenda, I got that sinking, what now feeling. Charles, our CFO, looked at me and said, "We need to rumble with you on a growing concern about how we're working together." For years, my first thought in a situation like this would have been, "Oh God, it's an intervention, and I'm the intervenee." But I trust my team, and I trust the rumble process. Chaz, as I've called him for 25 years, cut right to the chase. We kept setting unrealistic timelines, working frantically to meet them, failing, setting new timelines, and still not meeting them. It keeps us in constant chaos, and people are burning out. When you set a timeline and we push back because we know it's unattainable, you get so insistent that we stop pushing. It's not working. You have a lot of strengths, but you're not good at estimating time, and we need to find a new process that works for all of us. As my team sat there looking anxious for me to respond and relieved that the issue was on the table regardless of my response, I thought about the first time I heard someone say, "You're not good at estimating time," and I drifted off to the memory of an almost fight I had with Steve a decade before this meeting. Steve and I, along with our next door neighbors, signed up to host a progressive dinner party to raise money for our daughter's PTO. Steve and I were in charge of appetizers and salad at our house. Then the guests would walk next door for dinner, then back to our house for dessert and coffee. Very retro and very fun. Everything sounds easy when it's months away. I remember exactly where I was standing when I looked at Steve and said, "This is going to be great. I'm excited about the new recipes. All we need to do is get the house ready. I can do a little paint touch up in the dining room, and I need you to add some pops of color in the front yard. I need the yard to say, 'Welcome, we're glad you're here.' These flowers are evidence that we're awesome neighbors who have our shit together." Steve just stared at me. I glared back at him. "What? Why are you looking at me like that?" Steve said, "The dinner party starts in 2 hours." "I know," I said. "I've thought about it. It takes you 15 minutes to get to Home Depot, 30 minutes to pick out the right combinations of flour, 15 minutes to get home, 45 minutes to plant them, and then 15 minutes to take a shower." Steve couldn't speak. He just stood there, shaking his head, until I said, "What? What's wrong?" Steve said, "You're not good at estimating time, Brienne." I quipped back without thinking. Maybe I'm just faster than most people. I drew a deep breath, immediately regretting being a smartass when I needed him to hightail it to Home Depot. I responded to my own comment before he could. "Really? Why do you think that I'm bad at estimating time?" "Well, for starters," he said, "you didn't factor in the hour we're going to need for the fight that's going to break out when I say, 'Hell no. I'm not going to landscape the front yard 2 hours before company comes.'" And you respond by accusing me of never caring about the details or worrying about the little things. You'll say my lack of attention to detail is why you're so stressed out all the time. Then you'll say something like, "It must have been nice not to have to worry about the little things that make a big difference." I just stood there. The fact that he was saying all of this in a kind way and not being crappy made it worse. He continued, "Your must be nice comment is going to feel like blame and criticism, and it's going to piss me off. All of the stress of hosting this party is going to escalate things. You'll try not to cry because you don't want puffy eyes, but we'll both end up in tears. We'll spend the rest of the night just wanting it to be over, so we're not going to get flowers, and I think we should skip the fight, given our tight timeline." His prophecies forced me into a weepy laugh. Okay, that was painful and funny. Steve said, "The best thing you could do right now is go for a short run and take a shower." What people see is what they get. As I pulled myself back from this memory and into my seat at the table with my team, I found myself deeply grateful for Chaz's clarity. Over our years of researching and working together, we have learned something about clarity that has changed everything, from the way we talk to each other to the way we negotiate with external partners. It's simple but transformative. Clear is kind, unclear is unkind. I first heard this saying 2 decades ago in a 12-step meeting, but I was on slogan overload at the time and didn't even think about it again until I saw the data about how most of us avoid clarity because tell ourselves that we are being kind, when what we are actually doing is being unkind and unfair. Feeding people half truths or bullshit to make them feel better, which is almost always about making ourselves feel more comfortable, is unkind. Not getting clear with a colleague about your expectations because it feels too hard, yet holding them accountable or blaming them for not delivering is unkind. Talking about people rather than to them is unkind. This lesson has to wildly transform my life that we live by it at home. If Ellen is trying to figure out how to handle a college roommate issue, or Charlie needs to talk to a friend about something, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. I looked at my team and said, "Thank you for trusting me enough to tell me this. It's not the first or even 100th time I've heard this feedback about my sucky time estimation skills. I'm going to work on it. I'm going to get better." I could tell they were a little disappointed in my response. The "okay, I get it and I'll work on it" is a common shutdown technique. I took a deep breath and lead into the mother of all rumble tools, curiosity. "Tell me more about how this plays out for y'all. I want to understand." I'm glad I asked. I needed to hear what they had to say, and they needed me to hear how frustrating, demoralizing, and unproductive it was for me to continue pitching ideas and timelines that were completely unrealistic, and then looking at them like they were crushing my dream when they did their jobs by being honest and saying, "That will take at least 12 months, not 2 months, and it will require significant cash investment." It was painful and uncomfortable, which is exactly why we try to wrap things up quickly and get the hell out of conversations like this. It's so much easier to say, "Got it, on it," and run. After listening, I thanked them for their courage and honesty and promised again that I would think about it. I asked if we could circle back the next day. In my research and in my life, I've found absolutely no benefit to pushing through a hard conversation unless there's an urgent, time sensitive issue at hand. I've never regretted taking a short break or circling back around a few hours of thinking time. I have, however, regretted many instances where I pushed through to get it over and done with. Those self-serving instincts end up costing way more time than a short break. When I got home that evening, I downloaded a couple of books on project management, and for some reason, maybe something I read on LinkedIn, I convinced myself that I needed a Six Sigma black belt. I had no idea what that even meant, but I googled it, and after I read it for a few minutes, the thought of it made me want to knock myself unconscious with my laptop. It didn't take long before I realized that my plan wasn't going to work. I'm not good at time or things with hard edges, like Tetris or Blokus. I don't think that way or see the world that way. I see projects in constellations, not lines. I see plans the way I see data, relationally with rounded corners and a million connection ports. As much as I read and tried, it felt like a strange and terrible spreadsheet world to me. Interested in an example of how I think? Brace yourself. When I realized that I couldn't return to my team and impress them with my shiny new black belt and laser-like time estimations, it made me think immediately of Luke Skywalker struggling to become a Jedi warrior in The Empire Strikes Back. I share my love for this story in Rising Strong, but I'll share it again here because there's no such thing as too much Star Wars. Yoda is trying to teach Luke how to use the Force and how the dark side of the Force, anger, fear, and aggression, is holding him back. Luke and Yoda are in the swamp where they've been training when Luke points towards a dark cave at the base of a giant tree and, looking at Yoda, says, "There's something not right here. I feel cold, death." Yoda explains to Luke that the cave is dangerous and strong with the dark side of the Force. Luke looks confused and afraid, but Yoda's response is simply In you must go. When Luke asks what's in the cave, Yoda explains, only what you take with you. As Luke straps on his weapon, Yoda haughtily advises, your weapons, you will not need them. Luke grabs his lightsaber anyway. The cave is dark and scary. As Luke slowly makes his way through it, he is confronted by his enemy, Darth Vader. They both draw their lightsabers, and Luke quickly cuts off Vader's helmeted head. The head rolls to the ground, and the face guard blows off the helmet. Only it isn't Darth Vader's face that is revealed. It's Luke. Luke is staring at his own head on the ground. This parable got me thinking about the possibility that maybe the problem was less about my time estimation and project management skills and more about my fears. So I wrote down a couple of very specific examples of timelines that I forced on my reluctant team, and sure enough, the biggest enemy was not a lack of estimation skills, but a lack of personal awareness. Was I cutting off my own head with a lightsaber? I discovered that my unreasonable timelines were seldom driven by excitement or ambition. I drive these unattainable timelines for two reasons. One, I'm feeling fear, scarcity, and anxiety. We're not doing enough. Someone else is going to think of this idea before we get it done. Look what everyone else is doing. Or two, in addition to the daily work we do together, I'm often holding visions of longer term university commitments, publishing contracts, and a dozen potential collaboration conversations in my head. Sometimes I'm pushing timelines because I'm trying to sync up the timing on projects and deadlines that my team doesn't even know about because I failed to share. It was powerful to figure out the source of the issue, but that didn't translate to my wanting to circle back with my team about these key learnings. I didn't want to say I'm actually not good at the time estimation piece, and more I understand that skill set, the less confident I am that I will actually get much better. I didn't want to share the truth about my fear. What if the scarcity and anxiety are happening because I have no business being a leader? Even being honest about my failure to communicate larger strategy was daunting. What if my communication fails are just symptomatic of my being in over my head trying to run businesses? The most critical thing that the shame gremlins kept whispering was, you don't belong in this job. You study leadership, but you can't lead. You're a joke. When we're in fear or an emotion is driving self-protection, there's a fairly predictable pattern of how we assemble our armor, piece by piece. I'm not enough. 2. If I'm honest with them about what's happening, they'll think less of me or maybe even use it against me. 3. No way am I going to be honest about this. No one else does it. Why do I have to put myself out there? 4. Yeah, screw them. I don't see them being honest about what scares them, and they've got plenty of issues. 5. It's actually their issues and shortcomings that make me act this way. This is their fault, and they're trying to blame me. 6. In fact, now that I think about it, I'm actually better than them. People think it's a long walk from I'm not enough to I'm better than this, but it's actually just standing still in the exact same place in fear, assembling the armor. I don't want to live in fear or leave from fear, and I'm sick to death of the armor. Courage and faith are my core values, and when I'm in fear, I show up in ways that leave me feeling out of alignment with these values and outside my integrity. This is when I remember Joseph Campbell's quote, which I believe is one of the purest calls to courage for leaders. The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. Campbell consulted with George Lucas on Star Wars, and there's no question in my mind that my favorite scene is Lucas bring this wisdom to life. This is how I think. No black belt, but I have to believe that the force is with me. Treasure hunting. What is the treasure I seek? Less fear, scarcity, and anxiety, less feeling alone, more working together. towards goals that excites all of us. What is the cave I fear to enter? I'm afraid to admit that I don't know how to do some of the things that I think all real leaders know how to do. I don't want to share that when I'm scared, I make bad decisions, and I felt stuck and scared, tired and lonely a lot lately. When I sat down with my team for our circle back, we started the meeting with one of our rituals, permission slips. We each wrote down one thing that we give ourselves permission to do or feel for this meeting. Sometimes we do it on post it notes, but I prefer to write it in my journal so that in addition to my meeting notes, I have a reminder of what I was feeling that day. That afternoon, I gave myself permission to be honest with my team about my experience and the stories I make up about sharing my feelings. Two of the other permissions I remember my team sharing that day were listen with passion and ask for breaks if we need them. Permission slips are powerful. I've seen people after coming into meetings hell bent on getting approval for their idea or plan instead of give themselves permission to stay open minded or to listen more than they talk. I've also heard I give myself permission to ask for more time to think about something before I share my point of view, or I give myself permission to be present here even though I'm getting pulled in another direction today. We love permission slips because just like when I used to sign a permission slip to allow Ellen or Charlie to go to the zoo with their class, they still had to get it to the teacher and get on the bus. Just because you write down permission to speak up, even though I'm the only person here who isn't a content expert, doesn't mean that you're going to do it. Permission slips aren't promissory notes. They are for stating and writing down intentions only, so there are no repercussions if you fail to deliver. However, they are useful for increasing accountability and the potential for support, and also for understanding where everyone in the room is coming from. After we shared permission slip, I told them about my unsuccessful experience reading the business books. I explained how I had discovered that fear, anxiety, and scarcity were driving my unrealistic timelines, and how I got even more fearful when they responded with the families of contingencies and critical paths. I walked them through what it felt like for me when they pushed back about timelines that I calculated based on a million moving pieces, some of which were completely off the radar. Because we're a close group and they worked their asses off, it was hard to tell them that I can feel completely alone in trying to keep and coordinate all of the balls in the air. Basically, I owned that all of my timeline pushing stemmed from fear, and that rather than being honest about those feelings and owning them, I would offload the emotions on them with anger and the really shitty behavior of looking at them like they were dream crushers. I told them about trying to read the books on project management and estimation skills, and believing that the time estimation part of my brain might be missing. They didn't respond with, "No, it's not missing." Instead, they actually agreed. Murdoch, my manager, kindly said, "Yes, could be missing, but the good news is that it makes room in your brain for all that creativity." And we all laughed hard about the black belt. We identified 4 key learnings during a rumble. First, as a leadership team, we need a shared understanding of all the moving pieces so no single person is the connective issue. We failed this with a new communication process that include the team continuing to meet across all areas of the businesses. When I locked away writing, researching, or on the road, we also have a new meeting minutes process. Everyone takes their own notes, but one person in the meeting volunteers to capture minutes. These are narrowed down to date, meeting intention, attendance, key decisions, task, and ownership. The great thing about this new practice is that everyone in the meeting is responsible for stopping to say, let's capture this in the minute, not just the minute taker. And we now stop meeting for 5 minutes early to review and agree on the minutes before we leave. Before we walk out of the meeting, the minute taker slacks them to all of us and pulls them in any other relevant channel. So there isn't any cleanup or synthesizing guesswork after we've dispersed. The minutes process also solves several other ongoing problems, including subjective minutes as a result of one person writing them up for memory hours after the meeting, and keeping our dispersed teams up to speed on the frequent pivots that define a startup environment. This new meeting documentation process, combined with my commitment to copy my team on planning emails with potential collaborators and my publisher, means that everyone has much more access to what's going on across the difficult areas of our work. We also agreed that we'd work together on estimating timelines and due date, rubbing on them until we all own them as a team. Today, we have started using a time estimation and project priority practice that seemed simple but is effective and widely telling. We call it the turn and learn. We all get post-it notes and write down how long we think a project is going to take, and if we were looking at several projects that we need to practice, we'll write the projects in my priority order. Once everyone has written down an estimate or priority ranking in private, we count to 3 and show our answers. This practice controls for the halo effect, created when everyone sees what the person with the most influence in the room wants and follows suit. It's also controls for the bandwagon effect, that very human instinct to follow suit when you disagree. It's tough to be the last to share when everyone is on board and getting increasingly excited about an idea. It's about creating space to understand different perspectives, learning from everyone around the table, and identifying areas where we need to get clear on expectations. Most often, we learn that we are all working off different data and assumptions, or that we don't fully understand the lift, or we don't get the load certain people are already carrying. It's a huge connections tool. It was clear that I had some serious personal work to do, and we also unearthed a dangerous pattern that we needed to name and deconstruct, a pattern that I observe in organizations all the time but was in my blind spot. It's observation versus marketing, finance versus creative. The spender watches the spenders versus the savers, the heart versus the intellects, the dreamers versus the sticks in the mud. This type of binary thinking is very dangerous because we are not leveraging the future of people. The world becoming caricatures and stereotypes. Juan is such a optimist with his sales projections, but it's all right because Kerry will come in hard with worst case scenario numbers and kill those fantasies. We should all be held back accountable for being both optimistic and realistic. If you gain a reputation for being an idealist, you lose credibility and trust. If you force yourself to be the game, to force yourself to be the reality checker, you never get the opportunity to take chances and risk. This site took us straight to the pages of Jim Collins' class, Sick Book Good to Great. We had done a company-wide read of the book, and even at the time, the Stockdale paradox was something that stuck with us. As Collins explained, the Stockdale paradox was named after Admiral Jim Stockdale, who spent years as a prisoner of war in Vietnam. He was tortured more than 20 times during his imprisonment from 1965 to 1973. In addition to fighting to stay alive, he worked every day to help the other prisoners survive the physical and emotional torment. When he interviewed Stockdale, Collins asked him, "Who didn't make it out?" Stockdale replied, "Oh, that's easy, the optimist." Stockdale explained that the optimists would believe they'd be out by Christmas, and Christmas would come and go. Then they would believe they'd be out by Easter, and that day would come and go, and the years would tickle by like that. He explained to Collins they died of a broken heart. Stockdale told Collins, "This is a very important lesson. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the dark, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be." We named this third key learning Gritty Faith and Gritty Facts. And today, we all worked to take responsibility for both dreaming and reality checking those dreams with facts. When stress is high, we can still find ourselves slipping into some of these patterns, especially failing to communicate all of these pieces and to maintain connective tissues. What's powerful about doing this work is that we now recognize it very quickly and we can name it. Once that happens, we know that rumble needs to happen and why. At the end of the meeting, I apologized for offloading my emotions on them, and of equal importance, I made a commitment to make good on that apology by talking about my fears when they creep up and staying aware of the behaviors that fear drives in me. I also checked with my team to make sure we agreed that if I was successful changing those behaviors, it would address the key learnings that we discussed. Apologizing and backing that up with behavior change is normalized in our organization from onboarding, while some leaders consider apologizing to be a sign of weakness. We teach it as a skill and frame the willingness to apologize and make amends as brave leadership. Reflecting on the key learnings, all of us owned our parts and talked about how we would incorporate these learnings going forward. Examining our part is also critical to our rumble process. I get to be in a rumble or any tough conversations, even one where I'm 99% sure I'm totally in the clear, in which after digging in, I didn't have a part. Even if my part was not speaking up or staying curious, we are big believers in where's my part? The power and wisdom to serve others. Joseph Campbell's lesson was that when you find the courage to enter that cave, you've never going in to secure your own treasure or your own wealth. You face your fears to find the power and wisdom to serve others. In that spirit, I want to introduce you to Colonel Dee Halfhill. She is currently the Director of Innovations, Analysis, and Leadership Development for Air Force Global Strike Command. which comprises 33,000 officers and enlisted and civilian airmen. Prior to her current position, she commanded the 2nd Mission Support Group at Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana, and was responsible for 1,800 airmen and the day-to-day sustainment operation of Barksdale Air Force Base. It was during her tenure as the commander of that organization that the following incident took place. Dee Dee Halfhill is one of my leadership heroes and a total badass. I often think about this story when I need inspiration to choose courage over comfort so I can serve others. Dee Dee writes, I think one of the most helpful things I've learned from Brienne's work is the importance of using the right language to talk about hard things and tackle tough subjects. Conceptually, as leaders, I think we understand vulnerability and are even personally willing to be vulnerable. But we don't always have the right language or practice in applying such concepts. It doesn't really work to say, I'm going to be vulnerable here with you right now. During the first year of my command, I was presenting an award to an airman at a squadron event. At the end of the presentation, I asked if anyone had any questions. A young airman raised his hand and asked, Ma'am, when is the ops tempo, the pace of current operation, going to slow down because we are really tired? Yeah, I said. It has been very busy and we asked a lot of you, I explained. It's not just here at Barksdale, though. I just came from a different command where I heard the same thing. Across our Air Force, leaders know we're asking a lot of you, and they know you're tired. Yes, ma'am, we are tired. While the squadron itself is larger, there were probably about 40 airmen at that event that day. I asked everyone who was tired to raise their hands, and pretty much every hand went up. I thought about Brienne's work and the power it has given me to talk about things that are uncomfortable. I went on. I want to share something with all of you that I read recently that has really made me stop and think. 3 days ago, I was reading an article in the Harvard Business Review, and it was talking about an organization that was researching companies that were reporting high levels of exhaustion. This team went into these companies to see what was driving such high levels of exhaustion. What they found was that while these employees were in fact exhausted, it wasn't just because of the ops tempo. They were actually exhausted because people were lonely. Their workforces were lonely, and that loneliness was manifesting itself in a feeling of exhaustion. I stopped for a second and looked out at the group, then continued, because that's what happens, right? When we are lonely, we just feel lethargic. We don't really want to do anything. We think we are tired and we just want to sleep. I paused. So, if I were to ask you instead of who's tired, who's lonely, how many of you would raise your hand? At least 15 people raised their hand. Loneliness is such a hard thing for many of us to admit. I thought maybe one person would raise a hand, but when 15 people raised their hands, I was shocked. For lack of better language, I had a oh shit moment. I really didn't know what to do. I stood there, stunned, in front of everyone, thinking I'm not a therapist. I'm not equipped for this. I certainly wasn't prepared for nearly a quarter of the group to admit such a raw emotion to me. And truthfully, I'm trying to get through some of the same emotions myself. It was uncomfortable, and the discomfort was making me want to move on to a different topic. But that's where Brienne's work has given me courage. 5 years ago, before hearing her work, I would never have had the courage to ask that question, and I certainly wouldn't have been prepared to hold space for the answers. Our Air Force, our military in general, is facing challenges with suicide, with people feeling isolated and hopeless. As leaders, we are trying everything we can to reach our airmen and ensure they know that suicide is not the answer. We spend so much time talking with them about available resources, But I'm not sure enough of us are talking about the fact that in the end, a lot of people are just lonely. They're not connecting and they're not reaching out. Before I even asked the question, I knew it was going to be very uncomfortable, but I also knew it was an important question to ask. So I decided to call on courage and vulnerability and stay in the moment. I decided to be honest with them. This breaks my heart. Loneliness isn't something I've talked about with you before, but seeing so many of you raise your hands today scares me a little because I'm not entirely sure what to do with this information. As a leader, if you tell me you're tired, I'm going to send you home, tell you to take some leave, to take some time away and get some rest. But if what's really going on is you're lonely, then sending you off to be by yourself, yet again, means that I could possibly exacerbate the very problem we were so desperately trying to combat in our Air Force, which is that some people are so out of hope, feeling so isolated that they are doing something irreversible. My willingness to ask an uncomfortable question opened the door to a great conversation. We ended the afternoon event having had a very candid discussion about how we build relationships in the unit, how we reach out to others when we're feeling alone, and how we create a community of inclusion. It also provided invaluable insights for the squadron commander and set him on a path to address the right issue: connection and inclusion versus busyness and exhaustion. It was also a pivotal moment in my life leadership growth. In my own leadership growth, I realized that day that as a leader, if I am comfortable enough to use the right language and say, "Are you lonely?" I may be able to create a connection that gives someone hope. It's possible that by using the right language, I'll create a connection where maybe, just maybe, they will come and talk to me. And then we can do something about it. Most of the time, if I'm not comfortable with the discomfort that can come from such a moment, and I encounter someone who is having trouble, I send them, and rightfully so, to helping professionals, to trained therapists. Sometimes I fear, though, that in doing so, I am sending the message, I don't know how to deal with this, or I don't have the space to handle the heaviness of this, or I have so many other demands that I just can't deal with it. As leaders, I certainly believe we all want to do the right thing, but we don't always have the bandwidth or experience to take care of someone the way they need to be taken care of. Sending them to helping professionals is absolutely the right thing to do, but I also think it can add to the feeling of isolation. In some sense, it may feel as if I'm pushing that airman away and I'm telling them to let the professionals deal with it. The subconscious message that I could be sending is, "You are not with me, and I am not with you." That day when I saw all those hands go up, it affected me so much that I tell the story every chance I get. I want leaders, I want fellow airmen to hear and feel for themselves how it feels when we use words like lonely versus exhausted. I've now told the story at least 30 to 40 times to different groups, to people of different ranks and professions in the Air Force. I know I've hit a nerve because every time I tell the story, as I look out at the crowd, I see people nodding in agreement. They're connected. You can see it, you can feel it. They are relating to what it feels like to be in the military, to be away from home, and how hard it is to build community with every new assignment. They are enthralled in what I'm saying in that moment because they too have had their own moments of loneliness. I tear up every time I tell the story because I know it's resonating with them. And I'm sad that we don't talk openly about it more often. In some cases, our lives depend on it. Now, after almost every presentation, someone will come up to me and ask, "What do I do when I'm lonely?" I'm certainly not an expert on this topic, which in itself is intimidating. I've opened the door to a conversation I don't always feel equipped to address, but that is why Brienne's work is so important. We have to have the hard conversations even when we are not ready. I always use Brienne's words and tell the asker, "I am a traveler, not a map maker. I am going down this path same as and with you." I tell everyone who shares this moment with me that I try to be very deliberate in scheduling plans. that I am very deliberate in building relationships so that when that feeling of loneliness strikes, I have someone I can reach out to. More than anything, I tell them I'm honest about the way I'm feeling and when I'm struggling. Never once before this event did an airman of mine come up to me and tell me they were lonely. By starting the conversation, I believe I've given them permission. I've conveyed that it's a safe topic to discuss. Now, when they come to me and they themselves are vulnerable, I have an opportunity to address it before their loneliness gets to a level of overwhelm and they see no other way out. Once I was Once when I was telling a story, another commander came up to me and said, I talk to my folks all the time about being disconnected. I looked at her and said, why do you use the word disconnected? It's such a sterile word. Why not just use the word lonely? I can't say for certain, but she appeared uncomfortable with that. I went on. If I ask an airman, are you feeling disconnected? I don't feel like that airman knows that I truly see them. That I understand what is they're going through. Because again, disconnected is a sterile word. It's a safe word. It's not a word that conveys the true depth of shared human experience, like loneliness. Whereas if I ask an airman, are you lonely? I feel as if I am reaching them at a deeper level. I am letting them know in that moment I am comfortable addressing the messy parts of life and I won't shy away from their loneliness. In a sense, I'm telling them, let's go there together. I am strong enough to hold this for the both of us. The words we use really matter, but words like loneliness, empathy, compassion are not words often discussed in our leadership training, nor are they included in our leadership literature. The Air Force's most current manual on leadership, Air Force Doctrine Document 11, Leadership and Force Development, was written in 2011. In the document, it explains that our Air Force's current core values are an evolution of 7 leadership traits identified in the Air Force's very first manual on leadership. Air Force Manual 3515, which was written in 1948, one of the 7th traits was humaneness. My first reaction was, what is humaneness? Intrigued and curious, I set out to find out the 1948 document. Interestingly, it took me a few hours to find the 1948 manual because it was not located in any of the leadership files. It was actually buried in the historical documents of the Air Force Chaplain Corps. As I was reading the document, I was struck by how much emotion I was feeling from the words on the page. So I started to pay more attention. The pages were full of words and phrases like to belong, a sense of belonging, feeling, fear, compassion, confidence, kindness, friendliness, and mercy. I was amazed. Here's this military document that's talking about leadership with mercy and kindness and belonging and love. Yes, the word love was in this military leadership manual. I decided to do a word search for these words and phrases to see how often they were used. A discussion of feeling how men would feel was referred to 147 times. The importance of creating a sense of belonging was mentioned 21 times. The fear of combat, the fear of exclusion, the fear a life in the profession of arms will bring was mentioned 35 times. Love, what it means as a leader to love your men, was brought up 13 times. I won't go through the entire document, but suffice it to say this document used the language that speaks to the human experience when it was instructing leaders on how to lead people. I went back to our current manual on leadership and searched for the same word. Unfortunately, such words weren't used. Over and over again, each search turned up 0. These words that address the real emotions of people have been completely removed from our language on leadership. Our most current manual on leadership uses phrases like tactical leadership, operational leadership, strategic leadership, important concepts, no doubt, but the concepts provide little guidance to our young leaders on how to deal with the many complexities of how our airmen process the experience of being in the military during a time of war. In sanitizing our language, I think we've decreased our comfort with expressing those feelings and holding that same space for others. I'm comfortable using a word like lonely a sometimes awkward and uncomfortable feeling and word for us to talk about, because I am willing to sit in that discomfort and give them permission to be in it with me. When I first started learning from Brienne's work and talking about it, specifically the power of vulnerability in leadership, people would always look at me like I was crazy. I realized then I wasn't going to be able to talk about it on a large scale. So I decided I would start small and I would use her work with just my 6 squadron commanders. I felt that if I did nothing more than help these 6 people become leaders with different tools to navigate the challenges of leadership, then I would have done enough. With these 6 leaders, we have dug in, and because of that, there have been a million moments where Brienne's work has changed the way we are leading people. If you read either Didi's story or the story about how my team and I worked through our rumble and think this is way too kumbaya, ask yourself if you're underestimating the courage these types of conversations take, or maybe diminishing the effort so you don't have to give it a shot. If you read these stories and think, I'm not sure I could ever do this work with my team, I have a suggestion. Make copies of this section. Ask your team to read it. Then bring them together for 45 minutes. Ask a few questions. What do you think? Would putting any of this language or these tools into practice be helpful for us? If so, what would we need to do it? This is a great opportunity for container building. If the team thinks there's nothing helpful here, ask why not. This is a daring opportunity to surface fears, feelings, and self-expectations and intentions, or just to hear better ideas. If you read these stories and think, who has the time? I'd ask you to calculate the cost of distrust and disconnection in terms of productivity, performance, and engagement. Here's what I know to be true from my experience and what I consider to be one of the most important learnings from this research. Leaders must either invest a reasonable amount of time attending to fears and feelings, or squander an unreasonable amount of time trying to manage ineffective and unproductive behavior. What this means is that we must find the courage to get curious and possibly surface emotions and emotional experiences that people can't articulate or that might be happening outside their awareness. If we find ourselves addressing the same problematic behaviors over and over, we may need to dig deeper to the thinking and feeling driving those behaviors. After the third one-on-one addressing the same issue, it's easy to make up the story that this person is just being difficult or even testing us. But what I found out in my own experiences is that we haven't gone deep enough. We haven't peeled away enough layers of the onion. And once we start peeling, we have to leave long pauses and empty space. I know the conversation is hard enough, but people need white space. Stop talking, even if it's awkward, which it will be the first 15 minutes, 15 times. And when they start talking, which they normally will, listen, really listen. Don't formulate your response while they're talking. If you have a great insight, hold it. Don't do that thing where the listener starts nodding faster and faster, not because they're actively listening, but because they're trying to unconsciously signal the talker to wrap up so they can talk. Keep a lot of space in the conversation. Another thing, when we are in tough rumbles with people, we can't take responsibility for their emotions. They're allowed to be pissed or sad or surprised or elated, but if their behaviors are not okay, we set them boundaries. I know this is a tough conversation. Being angry is okay. Yelling is not okay. I know we're tired and stressed. This has been a long meeting. Being frustrated is okay. Interrupting people and rolling your eyes is not okay. I appreciate the passion around these different opinions and ideas. The emotion is okay. Passive-aggressive comments and put-downs are not okay. Also, don't forget one of our favorite Rumble tool, the timeout. When Rumble become unproductive, call a timeout. Give everyone 10 minutes to walk around outside or catch their breath. In our organization, everyone is empowered to call a timeout, and we all do it when we need it. Sometimes a team member will say, I need time to think about what I'm hearing. Can we take an hour and circle back after lunch? I really appreciate that because it leads to better decision making, and giving people a reasonable amount of thinking time cuts down on the meeting after the meeting and back channeling behaviors, which are both outside what's okay in our culture. Just remember, we can't do our jobs when we own other people's emotion or take responsibility for them as a way to control the related behaviors for one simple reason. Other people's emotions are not our jobs. We can't both serve people and try to control their feelings. Daring leadership is ultimately about serving other people, not ourselves. That's why we choose courage.